dense forest of Hollow Creek stretched out before them, an endless expanse of towering trees whose thick branches knitted together overhead, casting the ground beneath into near-perpetual twilight. The group of hikers had been planning this trip for months, an escape from the bustle of their daily lives to immerse themselves in the serenity of the wild. They were a tight-knit bunch. Ben, the natural leader, always planning their next adventure. Sarah, his younger sister, eager to push herself further into the unknown. Mark, the quiet one who preferred the company of nature over people. And Emily, Mark's girlfriend, whose unshakable optimism had the uncanny ability to lift anyone's spirits. The forest had a haunting beauty, its silence deep and profound, broken only by the occasional rustling of leaves or the distant call of a bird. The trail they followed wound through the forest, narrow and winding, cutting through thick underbrush and over bubbling streams. As the hours passed, the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. They were far from the familiar paths now, veering off into uncharted territory. None of them spoke much, content with the rhythmic sounds of their boots crunching on the forest floor. It was Sarah who first noticed something odd. The trail had been steadily climbing for some time, the incline making it difficult to keep a steady pace. She had lagged behind slightly, her feet aching from the climb, when a strange noise caught her attention. It was a faint sound at first, like an echo, but something was off about it. It didn't match the cadence of their steps or the occasional murmurs between them. It was distant, but carried with an uncanny precision, as if the forest itself was responding to their every move. Sarah stopped in her tracks, frowning, her eyes scanning the darkening forest. "Did you hear that?" she asked softly, looking over her shoulder at the others. The others, deep in their own thoughts, hadn't noticed the strange occurrence. Mark, who had been leading the group, turned around, wiping sweat from his brow. "What? The wind?" "No, it was like an echo," Sarah replied, her voice low. "But it didn't sound right. It sounded like it was answering us." She shook her head, dismissing the thought as soon as it had formed. "Maybe I'm just tired." Ben, ever the rational one, glanced around, then shrugged. "I didn't hear anything." But even as he spoke, he felt a prickle of unease at the back of his neck. They continued to walk in, though Sarah's unease lingered in the air. The sound returned, clearer this time. It wasn't a breeze carrying distant whispers, or the echo of their voices reverberating off distant rocks. No, it was something more deliberate, more sinister, as though it were mocking them. Not only did it sound like an echo, but it mimicked their voices with unsettling accuracy. Ben's mind raced, trying to find an explanation. Maybe the shape of the land created some kind of natural sound reflection, though he couldn't remember the last time he'd heard such a thing on their hikes. The further they ventured into the forest, the more pronounced the echo became, until it wasn't just a whisper in the distance. It was as if the forest itself was alive, listening to them, waiting for them to speak. At first, they tried to ignore it, chalking it up to the eeriness of the forest. But as the minutes passed, it grew more disturbing. Sarah would say something under her breath, and then, just a beat later, the forest would repeat it back to her. Mark would call out to the group, and a fraction of a second later, his words would return, but slightly off, distorted, stretched in a way that made his stomach turn. "What the hell is going on?" Mark muttered, stopping in his tracks. The echo was now too precise, too timely to ignore. He looked over at Ben for answers, but his friend seemed just as rattled. Emily glanced nervously at the trees around them, her usually bright demeanor now replaced with quiet concern. It wasn't the eerie sounds of the forest or the strange quality of the echo that unsettled her. It was the feeling that something wasn't quite right. The forest felt too still, too controlled, as if it were watching them. Maybe we're just overtired, Emily suggested, trying to stay upbeat, but her voice lacked conviction, even to her own ears. Ben nodded, though unease crept into his expression. It could just be the landscape. Some forests have odd acoustics. Maybe we're picking up sounds from deeper in the woods. But that didn't explain how the echo was so precise, how it seemed to respond directly to them, almost as if it were waiting for them to speak. There was something unnatural about it, something wrong. As the night deepened, the temperature dropped, the woods becoming darker still. The sky above was now completely black, the stars barely visible through the canopy. The echoes had not ceased. In fact, they had grown louder, more insistent. Whatever was behind those sounds seemed to follow them, drawing nearer with each step. Ben tried to press on, telling himself it was all in their heads. But then something strange happened. They stopped to rest by a large moss-covered boulder, and Sarah spoke quietly to Mark about how tired she was, how she wasn't sure if she could keep going. She didn't expect an answer, but the echo returned almost immediately. I don't know if I can keep going either. It wasn't her voice exactly, but it was so close that she felt a chill crawl down her spine. The sound was too accurate, too clear to be a mere coincidence. And there it was again, an echo, mimicking her words with the uncanny precision. Sarah stiffened, her eyes wide with dread. "That wasn't me," she whispered, her voice trembling. Mark, feeling a growing sense of unease, turned to Ben. "What the hell is happening?" Ben was quiet for a moment, then shook his head. "I don't know. This doesn't make sense. Maybe it's some kind of trick. Maybe someone's messing with us." But deep down, he knew something was wrong. The echo wasn't just a natural phenomenon. It wasn't the wind, and it certainly wasn't anyone in the group playing a prank. This felt like something else, something far darker. The strange behavior of the echo continued, almost mocking their every movement. It responded not just to what they said, but to their emotions, their thoughts. They hadn't said a word, but somehow when Mark glanced around uneasily, the echo responded to the tension in his body language. "Don't be scared," it whispered, faint, but unmistakable. "Did you hear that?" Emily asked, her voice tight with panic. "It said something." Before anyone could respond, the echo grew louder, more distinct. This time, it wasn't a mimicry of their voices, but a voice of its own. A low, guttural sound that sent a ripple of fear through the group. "Not far now." Ben's eyes widened. "What did it say?" Sarah took a step back. "I don't know, but I don't like this. I really don't like this." The air had become thick with dread. The faint, almost imperceptible echo had now become an unmistakable presence. Something that was not only listening, but anticipating their every move. It wasn't simply repeating their words. It was predicting them. As they pushed forward, the echo grew bolder, responding to their every conversation. Even before they spoke, it was as if it were one step ahead, aware of their thoughts before they had time to voice them. It no longer felt like an echo of sound, but a whisper of something that lurked just beyond their sight, something that knew them intimately enough to mimic them with a frightening accuracy. Suddenly, there was a strange feeling in the air. It wasn't just the echo anymore. It was something else, something heavier. And then, in the midst of the eerie silence, the echo spoke once more. This time, not as a voice, but as a breath. Right behind them, the cold bite of the evening air seeped through the trees as the group trudged onward, their steps slow and deliberate, weighed down by the unease that had settled deep in their bones. The eerie echo continued to follow them, growing louder, sharper, and more deliberate with each passing minute. They couldn't escape it, no matter how fast they walked or how far they traveled. It was always there, lurking just behind them, waiting to strike. Ben tried to ignore it. He told himself that it was just an odd acoustical phenomenon, something natural. But the more the echo mimicked their voices, the more his skepticism faltered. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. This wasn't just a trick of the sound. It was as if something was listening to them, something intelligent, something that understood them, knew them, and was waiting for them to slip up. The air around them grew heavier, pressing in from all sides. The trees, once majestic and proud, now seemed oppressive, their branches twisting like gnarled fingers, reaching out to trap them in a maze of shadows. They couldn't even see the stars above anymore, the canopy too thick to allow any light through. The world had become a monochrome of gray and black. The only sounds now were their own footsteps and the ever-present echo that followed them. At first, it was subtle. The echoes would mimic a word or two from their conversations, repeating the last syllable or stretching the final note just a little too long. But now, it was more precise, more deliberate. Each time one of them spoke, the echo responded with an uncanny accuracy. Not only were their words repeated, but the tone, the inflection, the very rhythm of their voices was perfectly mirrored, as though the forest was mimicking them in real time. Ben's nerves were shot. He could feel the weight of the silence pressing in, the constant tension in the air growing with every step. They had passed the point where it was easy to dismiss the echo as some natural anomaly. No, this was something else. He couldn't put it into words, but something was wrong. It wasn't just the way the echo mirrored them. It was the way it seemed to anticipate their every thought, their every move. Sarah was the next to speak, her voice trembling as she glanced nervously at the trees. "We need to find somewhere to rest. This place is starting to feel wrong." The echo didn't hesitate. "This place feels wrong." It wasn't just an echo of her words. It was as if it had reached into her mind and plucked her exact thoughts. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest, her breath quickening. She whipped her head around, searching for the source of the sound, but saw nothing. Nothing but the dark expanse of the forest. "What the hell is going on?" Mark muttered, his voice low and strained. The echo, as if in answer, responded immediately, as if mocking him. "What the hell is going on?" A cold shiver ran down Mark's spine. His eyes darted nervously to the others, but he saw the same fear reflected in their faces. They were all hearing it now. The echo wasn't just repeating them, it was responding to them, anticipating their fears and doubts. And it wasn't just mimicking their voices anymore. It had taken on a life of its own, a malicious presence that lingered in the air like a predator, waiting for the right moment to strike. Emily was the first to break the silence. Her voice was small, almost a whisper. "This isn't natural. This isn't just an echo." She shuddered, rubbing her arms as if trying to shake off the feeling that something was watching them. The echo responded before anyone could reply. "Not natural." Her words died in her throat, her breath catching in her chest. The voice wasn't their own anymore. It wasn't mimicking them. It was something else entirely. Something that was speaking to them not through sound, but through their own thoughts. Ben's heart skipped a beat. "We need to get out of here," he said, more to himself than to anyone else. "Now." The echo, as if reading his mind, repeated the words, but in a distorted, guttural tone that made Ben's stomach twist in knots. "Get out of here." Sarah's face went pale. She looked around wildly, her eyes darting from tree to tree, as if expecting something to leap out from the shadows. "It's like it knows what we're thinking," she said, her voice trembling. "It's not just echoing us. It's responding." The group fell into a nervous silence. The only sound now was the rustling of the leaves overhead, the occasional snap of a twig beneath their feet. The further they walked, the more the forest seemed to close in around them. The trees were no longer just trees. They were walls, barriers that boxed them in, trapping them in this strange, silent labyrinth. The echo continued to follow them, drawing closer with every step. But now, it wasn't just repeating their words. It was speaking before they even had the chance to voice their thoughts, their fears. It was like a reflection of their innermost anxieties, a mirror that showed them the darkest corners of their minds. Ben could feel his heart pounding in his chest, his breath shallow and quick. "We need to find a way out. Fast." But even as he said it, he knew that it was already too late. The echo had become too powerful, too insistent. It was no longer just a sound. It was something real, something that was with them, something that wasn't just watching them, but was part of them, a shadow that followed their every move. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. "I don't think we're going to get out of here. Not like this." Her words were immediately followed by the echo's low, distorted voice. "Not like this." It was the same, but different. The tone wasn't just mimicking her. It was mocking her, twisting her words into something unrecognizable. Mark's eyes darted around, his body tensing as if preparing for something. "We're being hunted," he whispered. "This thing, it's playing with us." The echo, as if hearing him, responded in kind. "It's playing with you." Mark spun around, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Where is it?" he demanded. "Show yourself." But there was no answer. The echo fell silent, leaving only the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. Ben's eyes searched the darkness, but he saw nothing. Nothing but the endless expanse of the forest stretching out before him. It was as if the trees themselves had swallowed whatever it was that had been following them. But then, the air shifted. A low, rumbling sound came from behind them, a sound that was too deep to be the wind. Ben's blood ran cold as he realized that the sound wasn't an echo. It wasn't a trick of acoustics. It was something else. Something real. A figure moved through the darkness, a shadow that seemed to shift and warp as it came closer. It was tall, impossibly tall, with limbs that seemed to stretch and twist unnaturally, like branches of a tree that had been warped by some unseen force. Its face, if it had one, was hidden in the darkness, but Ben could feel its gaze, cold, unfeeling, watching them. And then, it spoke, not in the voice of the echo, but in a voice of its own, a low, guttural whisper that chilled Ben to the core. "I've been waiting for you." The word sent a wave of terror crashing over him, and for a moment, he couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The figure took another step, and then another, closing the distance between them with a deliberate slowness that made every muscle in Ben's body scream for him to run. But he couldn't. It was as if his legs had turned to stone, as if some invisible force was holding him in place. And then, from behind him, came the sound of footsteps. The echo, it was closer now. Too close, as if the forest itself was breathing down his neck. Ben turned, heart hammering in his chest, and saw the others standing motionless, their faces ashen with terror. They hadn't moved. They hadn't even reacted. It was as if they were frozen, trapped in some kind of nightmare that they couldn't escape. And then, in one final moment of clarity, Ben understood. The echo wasn't just an echo. It was the thing behind them, and it had always been there. The darkness of the forest seemed to press in from every direction, suffocating in its intensity. The air, thick with dread, hummed with the sound of something that shouldn't be, something wrong. Ben stood motionless, his breath shallow and fast, heart thundering in his chest. His mind raced, grasping at any logical explanation for what he was seeing. But logic failed him. Nothing made sense anymore. The figure, tall and twisted, seemed to loom over him, its presence growing ever more oppressive. The forest had become a trap, its winding paths, its ancient trees, all leading them to this moment. The shadow behind them wasn't a trick of the mind, a playful echo of sound. It was something far worse, something ancient and hungry, waiting for the right moment to strike. The figure in front of them moved again, its grotesque limbs stretching unnaturally as it glided forward, its presence defying the laws of nature. Ben's body screamed to flee, to run, but no part of him obeyed. It was as though the air itself had turned to lead, each breath a laborious effort, each heartbeat an eternity. The others were frozen too, as if some invisible force had captured them, holding them in place, forcing them to watch, to endure. And then, a whisper, soft at first, barely audible, like a breeze brushing through the leaves. But it grew louder, clearer, until it was no longer a whisper but a voice that seemed to come from within his own mind, twisting, shaping his thoughts into something unrecognizable. "Do you know why you're here?" The words echoed not in the air, but in the depths of his mind. The voice was old, ancient, and far too familiar, as though it had always been a part of him. "Do you know what you've disturbed?" Ben's stomach churned as the realization hit him like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just a forest. This wasn't just an echo. This was a place of darkness, a place of things long forgotten by the world of men. The figure before them was not the source of the terror. It was the herald of something much worse, something that had been lying in wait for far longer than any of them could comprehend. The air seemed to warp around them, bending and twisting, as the world itself began to unravel. The shadows grew deeper, darker, and the ground beneath their feet trembled with a slow, rhythmic pulse, like the heartbeat of the forest itself. The echo, once a simple reflection of their words, now began to take shape, forming into a voice of its own, one that was both familiar and alien. It was speaking not just to them, but through them, its words laced with malice and a deep, insatiable hunger. "You think you can escape?" The voice mocked them, its tone filled with a twisted amusement. "You think you can outrun it, outsmart it?" Ben's breath caught in his throat. "Escape," he whispered, the words barely leaving his lips. "Is that what we're supposed to do?" The figure stepped closer, its form contorting and shifting, as if it were made of shadows, its face still hidden in the darkness. The very air around it seemed to grow colder, suffocating. It was almost as if the forest itself had become alive, its trees bending, the earth shifting beneath them, and yet they couldn't move. They were trapped, helpless, and then the ground beneath their feet shifted. Without warning, the earth cracked open with a deafening sound, a sharp, violent break, and the group of hikers was sent tumbling into a yawning abyss. They fell, screaming, their hands reaching for anything solid, but there was nothing to grab onto. The world around them had become a swirling mass of shadows and echoes, all of it pulling them deeper and deeper into the heart of the forest, into the darkness. Ben's mind whirled as he fell, his body weightless in the dark, a suffocating sense of vertigo overwhelming him. But just before he could lose himself entirely, just as the weight of the darkness threatened to consume him, a brilliant flash of light pierced through the black void. For an instant, everything stopped, the falling ceased, the dark shadows retreated, and the weight in his chest lifted. The group found themselves standing on solid ground once again, though not in the forest. No, this place was different. The trees had vanished, and the sky above was no longer the familiar canopy of leaves, but something far more surreal. The landscape stretched out before them, an endless sea of fractured stone and jagged cliffs, illuminated by an eerie, otherworldly light. The air was still, unnaturally so, and the temperature had dropped to a bone-chilling cold. Ben looked around, disoriented, his mind racing. Was this where they were meant to be? A strange, unnatural calm settled over him, and he turned to the others. They were all there, as frozen as he was, their eyes wide with the same confusion, the same terror. But there was something else now, something in the way the light flickered around them, as if they weren't truly alive here, as if they were somehow trapped in a realm between worlds. What is this place? Emily's voice cracked, her words trembling in the unnatural stillness. Before anyone could respond, the voice from the shadows spoke again, its tone now more familiar than ever, as if it had always been present, waiting for the moment to reveal itself. This is where it begins. This is where it all ends. Ben's pulse quickened. He could feel the presence of the forest, the echo, still surrounding them, still breathing down their necks, even though the trees were gone. The air was thick with the same oppressive energy that had followed them through the woods. The dark entity that had been stalking them was no longer just a shadow in the trees. It had found them. It had pulled them here. And then, in the distance, something moved. It was a figure, just like before. But this time, it was more than just a shape. The thing emerged from the darkness, its form towering and twisting, its limbs stretching out in grotesque angles. It was no longer a mere shadow. It had mass, weight, presence. It was real, and it was coming for them. "Do you see?" the voice whispered in Ben's ear, its words curling around his mind like tendrils of smoke. "This place is where the boundaries are thin, where the veil between worlds is torn, and the echoes of the past bleed through. And you are the ones who have disturbed it." Ben staggered back, his body instinctively retreating, though his legs felt like lead. "Disturbed it," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "What are you talking about? We didn't." The entity loomed over them, its shape growing more monstrous with every passing second. It wasn't just a figure anymore. It was an abyss, a void of nothingness, swallowing the very air around it. The ground beneath their feet began to tremble again, this time with an intensity that made Ben feel as if the very earth was about to crack open beneath them. And then, something changed. The shadows, once menacing and oppressive, began to retreat. The entity, though still present, seemed to falter, its form wavering as if caught between two realities. The light around them flickered, and for the briefest of moments, everything seemed to pause, like the entire world was holding its breath. Then, a voice. It wasn't the voice of the entity. It wasn't even an echo. It was something else entirely. A presence, calm and pure, that seemed to emanate from the very air itself. Enough. The word, soft but powerful, rang out across the void, and the entity recoiled. The air shifted, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the oppressive weight began to lift. The ground stopped shaking. The darkness retreated, and in the space where the shadows had once reigned, something else emerged. Light. Not the harsh, sterile light of the world above, but a warm, golden light that seemed to breathe with life. It enveloped them, gentle but firm, like a protective force wrapping around their bodies, lifting them from the edge of despair. The entity, its form now diminished, seemed to shrink, fading back into the darkness from whence it came. The shadows, which had once been their prison, now seemed to dissipate like smoke. The air cleared, and for the first time since their arrival in this strange, haunting place, the forest's grip loosened. Ben stood there, his body trembling, his mind reeling from the events that had unfolded. His gaze shifted to the others, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, they all shared the same expression: relief. The voice, calm and patient, spoke again. "You have seen the truth. You have witnessed what lies beyond. The echoes of the past will fade, but the lessons they have taught you will remain." Ben's heart slowed, his breath evening out. He didn't understand what had just happened, what it meant, but he knew one thing for sure. They had escaped. They had survived. And the forest would always be there, waiting